Hello, I am Professor Kino, and welcome to my Office of Cinematic Antiquity. Today we will be continuing the series of my top 10 favorite films. Coming in at number 4 is Auteur theory, the conjecture that states that each film director puts their own unique stamp, if you will, on their work visually and auditorially, is reinforced by the complete work of Wes Anderson. While it is true that it is not always easy to peg a film as being one director's or another's just by looking at it for a few seconds, the work of Wes Anderson is very different. His unique use of color, symmetry, awkward dialogue, colorful characters, and inventive practical effects are impossible to miss once they have been seen once. But despite most of his films being artistically similar, they are all unique and brilliant in their own way, and Anderson's 2014 film, The Grand Budapest Hotel, fits into this pattern nicely. Premise: an author recalls the time when a rich hotel owner recounted to him the strange events that led to the owner's acquisition of said hotel. The story, focusing primarily on the time the owner spent with his predecessor/mentor, features a plethora of impossibly strange, and oftentimes dark, occurrences that begin with the death of a loyal hotel patron and the theft of the priceless Renaissance painting Boy with Apple. Writing: The Grand Budapest Hotel follows a similar formula to a lot of Anderson's other films in that it uses quirkiness to tackle deep and sometimes dark themes. As per Anderson's style, the writing here is filled with awkward pauses, strange dialogue, colorful characters, and wacky scenarios. And while sometimes this style of filmmaking can be detrimental to the overall theme being conveyed, and indeed that is a criticism that can be made toward Anderson's films, its inclusion in the Grand Budapest Hotel feels perfect. Having seen all of Anderson's work, I can safely say that with each successive attempt, his craft becomes crisper, and with the Grand Budapest Hotel, it feels like he finally created his magnum opus. Every pause, every line, and every scenario work both individually and as a whole. Anderson brought his A-game to the storytelling in the Grand Budapest Hotel, and consequently, the film is a pleasure to watch from beginning to end. And the reason for this lies in the usage of the film's quirkiness. While in some of Anderson's work the quirkiness feels present for the sake of style, the Grand Budapest Hotel embraces it as part of the story, and its quirky awkwardness seeps its way into not just the film's visuals and dialogue delivery, but into its themes, a fact which I will elucidate through the following analysis. First and foremost, it is important to remember that the film is not just one story, but the story in a book being read by the fan of the book's author. In this book, the author recalls the time he spent at the Grand Budapest Hotel, where he was told the story of how its proprietor, Zero Mustafa, came into possession of it. And this format, a story within a story within a story, showcases both the broadest message of the film, that stories are what we have to remember the events and people that mattered to and moved us, and the ability for stories and their impact to transcend their authors and influence generations to come.
People think the writer's imagination is always at work, that he's constantly inventing an endless supply of incidents and episodes, that he simply dreams up his stories out of thin air. In point of fact, the opposite is true. Once the public knows you're a writer, they bring the characters and events to you.
And it is important to keep this, the idea that stories are synonymous with memories, in mind as the movie progresses, because the story that makes up the meat of the film, the one about how Zero Mustafa came into possession of the Grand Budapest, is just that, a memory. Once this is understood, it becomes clear, before we even hear that story, through the way that Mustafa and the Grand Budapest are described by the book's author, that the tale of Mustafa obtaining the hotel does not have a happy ending in and of itself. When the author talks about his time at the Grand Budapest, he says,
"It was off-season, and by that time decidedly out of fashion, and it had already begun its descent into shabbiness and eventual demolition."
And the author describes Zero Mustafa as
a small, elderly man, smartly dressed, with an exceptionally lively, intelligent face, and an immediately perceptible air of sadness. He was, like the rest of us, alone, but also, I must say, he was the first that struck one as being deeply and truly lonely.
With these descriptions, it becomes obvious that the story about how Zero came to acquire the hotel could be nothing but bittersweet. However, once Zero begins his tale, it is such an interesting ride that the thought of it not ending happily is quickly forgotten, and this is in part due to the main character of Mustafa's story, his predecessor, Monsieur Gustav.
Who's Gustav H? I'm afraid that's me, darling.
That fucking faggot.
Gustav is charming, intelligent, well-mannered, and, when it gets right down to it, a good man, and it is easy to like him right from the first time we meet him. And we would not be alone in doing so, because it is revealed that many of his hotel's patrons come to the Grand Budapest just for him. However, we are quickly shown that the eccentric and fanciful man is not actually Gustav's true self, and is, instead, an act. In actuality, he is a lot more solemn and melancholy than he lets on.
His own dinner he took alone in his room.
His past must have some dark memories. And once this is understood, his actions in public suddenly become more telling. His reciting of romantic poetry, for example, while nonsensical sounding at first, always deal with topics that are dark and depressing, such as tombs, filth, rot, and death.
While questing once in noble wood of grey medieval pine, I came upon a tomb, rain-slicked, rubbed cool, ethereal, its inscription long vanished, yet still within its melancholy fissures.
Similarly, during some of his monologues, he also expresses a sadness and pessimism on life.
You see, there are still faint glimmers of civilization left in this barbaric slaughterhouse that was once known as humanity. Indeed, that's what we provide in our own modest, humble, insignificant... fuck it.
Less subtly, however, are his actions when things start to get out of hand. For example, when the police come to arrest him at one point, he does not come quietly and, instead, tries to flee the scene.
By order of the Commissioner of Police of Broca Province, I hereby place you under arrest for the murder of Madame Celine Villeneuve de Goffin Taxis.
I knew there was something fishy. We never got the cause of death. She's been murdered. And you think I did it. Hey!
Additionally, twice throughout the film, when soldiers start to act violently in his presence, his charming personality fades away and he insults them.
You filthy goddamn pockmarked fascist assholes! You filthy goddamn pockmarked fascist assholes!
This showcases that he has not had a great history with the police and military in the past. When all of these traits are looked at, Gustav's solemn, melancholy, and lonely personality hidden behind a charming facade, his dark and depressing poems and monologues, and his contempt for the police and the military, they all show a man with a deep and troubled past. Except the only thing we as audience members discover about it is that Gustav was once a lobby boy at the Grand Budapest. The rest of his past is never told to us, or for that matter, to Zero Mustafa himself.
He never told me where he came from. I never asked who his family had been.
But while Gustav's sad story is ignored almost entirely, Mustafa's is told to the audience quite clearly, most probably because it is Mustafa telling the story. At the time he meets Gustav, Mustafa is a refugee from a war in which he lost his entire family, and he is trying to make it in a new country that he is not wholly familiar with.
Well, you see, my father was murdered, and the rest of my family were executed by firing squad. Our village was burned to the ground, and those who managed to survive were forced to flee.
And together, both with their troubling pasts, Gustav and Mustafa bond with each other and help each other as friends. And while the scenarios that they find themselves in, a murder mystery, the theft of a painting, a framing, an imprisonment, a jailbreak, a chase down a snow-covered summit, and a gunfight, are all strange and quirky, and most of the time presented to us in an awkward manner, that is kind of the point of the film. The characters' pasts are not the point of the story, and neither are the insane scenarios that they end up in. These are all just trivial, and this is proven by the way that Anderson uses his quirky and awkward storytelling to present them. The purpose of the story is Mustafa's and Gustav's friendship in the face of these dark, impossible, and wacky events, and the impact that these two friends had on each other.
Whence came these two radiant celestial brothers united for an instant as they crossed the stratosphere of our starry window? One from the east and one from the west.
Very good.
Mustafa tells the author his story because he believes Gustav is a man who should be remembered, not just because they were friends with each other, but because Gustav was a phenomenal man who deserves to be remembered. While the story does not end with everyone living happily ever after, in fact it ends with, and here is a spoiler alert, Gustav getting shot and Mustafa's wife and newborn child dying from disease, the sadness of the story is supposed to be secondary to the beauty of Mustafa's and Gustav's friendship, and it is this story of friendship that transcends Mustafa, that transcends the author of the book, and impacts the countless number of its readers. And through this, Anderson is able to craft a story that reveals the beauty of how stories, and the memories that spawn them, can impact both the storyteller and the story's audience emotionally by providing us with a fantastic story about how two men with troubled pasts bonded with each other through impossibly quirky, awkward, and strange events. Acting. As for the film's two main stars, they are both amazing. Ralph Fiennes plays Monsieur Gustav, and he is a revelation, and this is not just because he is playing a role that is rare for him to play. Known primarily for more serious films such as The English Patient and darker roles such as, most notably, Lord Voldemort in the Harry Potter films, he steps into the role of Monsieur Gustav as if it was made just for him. He is eccentric and odd, but is able to fling out witty and hilarious dialogue with such speed and perfection, it is a wonder why Fiennes has never played a role like this before. He is both hysterical and heartfelt, and, most importantly, watching his performance is a pleasure.
How fast can you pack?
5 minutes.
Do it, and bring a bottle of the Pouilly Jouvet 26 in an ice bucket with 2 glasses so we don't have to drink the cat piss they serve in the dining car.
Yeah.
And as for the other main character, the young Zero Mustafa, he is played by Tony Revolori. While I do not find his performance as compelling as Fiennes', he is still very good. He is perfect at being a duck out of water who is trying his best to learn and grow as a person. And by the end of the film, it is easy to see how the Zero at the beginning of the film ended up who he is at the end. And while this is very subtle, it takes a great deal of work on an actor's part to pull this off, and for that, Revolori needs to be commended.
Here.
Thank you.
It's a book.
I see.
Romantic Poetry, Volume 1, and Mr. Gustav recommended it. I have a copy of my own as well. I ruined the surprise, I suppose.
I'll go ahead and open it anyway.
Okay.
And as for the supporting cast, they are all great. Most of them are simply cameos by big-name actors that often work with Wes Anderson, but they all show off a charisma and charm that is spectacular for the minimal amount of screen time that most of them get. These include Warsa Lualia, Adrian Brody, Jeff Goldblum, Harvey Keitel, Jude Law, Bill Murray, Edward Norton, Jason Schwartzman, Tilda Swinton, Lea Seydoux, Owen Wilson, Bob Balaban, Tom Wilkinson, and, most notably, F. Murray Abraham as the elderly Zero Mustafa, Willem Dafoe as the hitman Jopling, and the always phenomenal Saoirse Ronan as the young Zero's girlfriend Agatha. Costumes, hair, and makeup. This is superb across the board. The clothes and makeup are styled to perfection. The hotel uniform's purple and red coloring is a great symbol for Gustav's and Zero's eccentricity compared to their enemies' dark-colored clothes, which symbolize their villainy. In fact, I'm going to drain away the sepia tone for a second here, just to help prove my point. And as for the minor characters, the attention to everyone's outfit, down to the colors and accessories, is both very Wes Anderson and simply perfect. Everything pops against the background and stands out to the audience. In fact, you could probably spend a whole video just on the perfection of this film's costumes and only scratch the surface. They are just that good. Set design. Again, this is spectacular. Every little prop feels like it was carefully chosen to fit the scene that it is in, and nothing feels like wasted space. And as for the actual layout of the sets, they are just as bombastic and amazing. They feel wacky and absurd, but in a way that complements the characters within them. And it is important to mention how Anderson utilizes practical effects to help show off some of these set pieces, and they are all the better for it. They are all a treat to look at and experience. Choreography. There are not really any action or dance numbers that require choreography in this film, but anytime there is a slight scuffle, it is handled in an awkward and quirky way that fits perfectly with the style of the rest of the film. Cinematography. This is another one of the film's and Anderson's strengths. The way that symmetry is used in order to position the actors and props is like nothing you would see except in a Wes Anderson film. The Grand Budapest Hotel, however, uses this style in the most prominent way of any Wes Anderson film, and it creates this lovely, quirky, awkward feeling that fits with the rest of the film. In other words, this is Anderson completely committing to the voice and visual flair that he has been experimenting with and teasing throughout all of his previous films. Editing. The Grand Budapest Hotel is not full of many quick edits and is instead full of a lot of longer takes and quite a few pans. In fact, a lot of this is due to the fact that a bunch of the conversations are not set up the way that they are in most other films. Typically, when someone is talking, the camera focuses on that person, but in the Grand Budapest Hotel, a lot of the conversations are done in a few takes that show all of the participants at once. Because of this, fewer edits are required, and this makes the whole film almost feel like a stage production, but at the same time, it still feels like a movie. However, when the film does make an edit that is different than this, such as when it quickly cuts to the close-up of a character's face, it is jarring, but that makes the subsequent part of the story feel more impactful, and all of this just adds to the quirky, awkward feel of the film that makes it so unique. CGI. I do not really have anything to report here. While there are definitely some post-production effects added to some of the scenes, there is nothing that ever really stands out as CGI. Any effects just add to the quirkiness of the rest of the film. Music. This is yet another quirky element of the film in that it is unique and different. But that is not a bad thing because Alexander Desplat's score, 1, re-emphasizes the feeling of the film that Anderson is trying to create, and 2, still does a phenomenal job at creating the feeling or feelings that the film scenes are trying to express in a wholly original manner. When the film needs to be melancholy, the music expresses it. When the film needs to be exciting, the music expresses it. And when the film needs to be intense, the music expresses it. And above all, the music is fun to listen to across the board. Direction. The Grand Budapest Hotel is a tour de force of direction. All the film's elements, from its writing to its costumes to its sets to its music to its editing, all build on each other to create a unique film about friendship, the absurdity of life, and the sometimes horrific events that happen in it. Anderson definitely spent a lot of time thinking about each of this film's aspects, and it shows because they are all nigh perfect. While many directors go into a film's pre-production with a vision, not all of them are able to reach their high ambitions. Anderson's work on the Grand Budapest Hotel, however, is the pinnacle of visionary. My enjoyment. I love Wes Anderson, every single one of his films, from Bottle Rocket to Rushmore to The Life Aquatic with Steve Zissou to Moonrise Kingdom to Isle of Dogs, but the Grand Budapest Hotel has to be my favorite. Not only does it maintain its charm after countless viewings, it is just so beautiful, funny, quotable, and entertaining. While I would be pleased watching any Anderson film, if I am given a choice, I will almost always choose the Grand Budapest Hotel. Recommendations. While my gut wants me to recommend this film to everyone because of how much I love it, I do know that its quirkiness is not everyone's cup of tea. If you have ever seen a Wes Anderson film before and were not all that into it, the Grand Budapest Hotel will not change your mind toward Anderson's style. In fact, it might turn you off to Anderson even more because of how Wes Anderson-y it is. But if you have never seen an Anderson film, give the Grand Budapest Hotel a shot. It is unique, it is fun, it is gorgeous, it is heartfelt, and it deserves a try.
But you get out there.
Shut the fuck up.
These guys are trying to escape.
What's wrong with you, you goddamn snitch?
God!
It's you. Thank you, you sweet, kind man.
Thanks for watching. I hope you liked it. If you did, leave a like. If you want to see more, please subscribe. I will be continuing the list of my top 10 films in my next video. Until then, I'm Professor Kino, and I look forward to our next discussion.